Yama. This is welcome in Gamilaroi, the language of the people on the land I grew up in northern New South Wales. My name is Ellen Forsyth. I work at the State Library of New South Wales, but like many library workers, I am currently working off-site. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are each on and where our libraries stand, and pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other First Nations people. We celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal cultures and languages across Australia. As well, I acknowledge the contribution that people of many nations have made to this country. If you're sharing on social media, please use the hashtag #RISG2020. And it would be great if you could post a photograph of how you're participating in this 100% online seminar. It would be lovely to see everyone's circumstances. Now, this seminar is jointly presented by the New South Wales Reference and Information Services Group and the State Library of New South Wales. Please mute your sound and video so that the presenters are not distracted. This is really important. Now, to let you know, you can use chat while the presenters are speaking, but they won't see your questions when they have screen share.
It's not me. Yeah.
But it's a good idea to put the questions there so they can see them ready to answer when they finish screen sharing. For those just coming online, to mute your video and sound, you mouse to the
Can you wipe it over, please? Which I tried to do yesterday. I went, that's right. We can't do that.
Can everyone please check that they have their video and their sound muted? Because I'm hearing a lot of things coming through at present. So mouse.
Hello, audience. How are you?
The sound is off.
Yeah, really good.
And
Thank
to do
you.
it without,
please check
well,
that.
the fact that it was done without consulting.
Because I cannot mute you all, even though I'm logged in.
Sorry, I just need to make sure I am actually muted.
Yeah, of course.
So can everyone please check their muting? This is really, really important. Both video and sound. Thank you. So please ask questions through chat because it will be helpful for the speakers. So first up, we actually get to hear from Mimosa Shah from Civic Labs at Skokie Library in the USA. They're doing a really interesting project around looking at community consultation. I'm just going to have to pause for a moment. Can everyone please check their video and sound? Because there's a very loud second stream coming through and it is quite distracting. Thank you. So, yes, so Civic Labs at Skokie Library is doing really exciting ways of engaging with their community around things of civic concern. And they were doing it in their library when their libraries were open, but they've moved it to doing some really interesting things online while their libraries are closed, just as ours are. So please join me in welcoming Mimosa.
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation. Many thanks to Ellen and the New South Wales Reference and Information Services Reference Group for inviting me to speak at your seminar. It goes without saying we are living in extraordinary times in which up-to-the-minute research is being shared and created rapidly. There's an urgent need to engage in civic discourse and participate in community decision-making. Such decisions must be made carefully and with ample empathic knowledge of the ways in which our actions can affect the lives of others. So today's agenda, I plan to talk about how the Civic Lab got started, what happens at the Civic Lab, who makes up it, and what did we learn through our experiences, and some food for thought and any questions you may have. So, at the library, we start with an integral premise. Libraries aren't neutral. We stand for information. The Civic Lab was developed to support dialogue and engagement on issues that affect our community. We recognize the library's role as a valuable, trusted third place for convening and hosting conversations with community members craving the opportunity to say
Kathleen,
connect, and
I can
learn.
hear them. I can hear them. Yeah, very good.
No, and I said, oh,
Excuse me, Mimosa, I'm just going to pause for a moment. It's actually really important that people check that they are muted because you're making it very hard for other people to hear. So please, can everyone check that they have muted their sound? I am trying to mute everyone, but the system will not allow me. So I need each of you to check now that you are muted. Thanks very much. And sorry for interrupting, Mimosa, but the background sound was getting really high. You're going along amazingly. My apologies for interrupting.
No, not at all. I understand the technological considerations. So let's go back again. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for your time this morning. So looking at the public library as a convener of civic engagement, libraries have acted as sites of engagement for generations. More recently, there have been publications documenting the ways libraries have sought community input in space planning, a process that encourages multi-tiered approaches to understanding how to embed oneself in community. As catalysts for civic engagement, public libraries have become invested in giving patrons the opportunity to obtain useful resources that allow one to make informed decisions. As cited in a 2012 article by Nancy Cranich, evidence suggests that when citizens participate in deliberation and decision-making, they learn how to take responsible social and political action. Public participation builds our capacity to go from being a spectator to an actor. So gathering and connecting. At the library, we have increasingly become more involved with encouraging patrons to consider ways to be more active in their civic lives, whether through displays or public programming, such as panel discussions and workshops. We provide our patrons with various entry points for engaging with a topic. In November of 2016, the Aspen Institute worked with our library to host a panel discussion and accompanying Q&A with patrons that was entitled What Every American Should Know. The event gathered policy experts and activists to consider what should be canonical texts and events in American history, i.e., what should every American know, that every civically engaged person can then use to buffer their knowledge and make informed decisions.
isn't he a good little lad?
Over the course of this 2-hour discussion,
I'm not sure, but wow.
started talking about what comprises the canon,
definitely not.
and more importantly, how our baseline for required knowledge changes over time and influences what decisions are made by elected officials.
Days a week, and so I sort of haven't said, look, I'm not do it. So isn't that generous of letting people doing it?
So, listening and speaking accordingly.
Well, that's
Over the past few years, we've seen the need to provide patrons with verifiable information and
you can't give
resources.
it away readily, do you?
Fake news, alternative facts, and other phrases have made it harder for the public to sift and accurately pinpoint what is news and what is, quote, news, unquote, a cycle that perpetuates anxiety and fear. We have a responsibility to our patrons to find and present reliable resources so that they may make intelligent decisions.
Yeah, really, really. Did you have a lovely Mother's Day?
I did, thank you. All right. Going back to the presentation, how do we define civic engagement? Civic engagement at Skokie Public Library. It refers to the programs and opportunities that promote and facilitate deeper understanding of civic institutions. We take a broad approach to it, with the Civic Lab being one of several strategies used to share and cultivate information literacy skills. Pop-up events are organized with the intention to introduce key sources. Above all, we try to use empathy to better connect with patrons as they reckon with the stories that make up news, so that they can find useful, timely information that's relevant and actionable. if indeed it is an actionable course. The end goal for our work is for patrons to make up their minds on issues based on credible information and critical reflection. As one patron put it, you need to have good information to make up your mind. If you have bad information, someone else is making up that mind for you. When devising the Civic Lab, we use two approaches. First is our library's patron engagement strategy, in which we treat each community member approaching a pop-up like any other service point. We do not make assumptions about their intentions. We seek to understand people's concerns, and we do our best to provide an experience that is engaging and enjoyable. When applying a civic engagement lens, we consider our patron engagement strategy as pivotal to the way that we actually begin the conversation. The second approach we use is from a reference question standpoint, which I know all of you will be familiar with. And working with adults especially, we found that they want to be intellectually stimulated and treated with respect during such pop-up conversations. As we do with any reference transaction, we ask questions that better help us gauge a community member's understanding with regard to a topic. We review core information literacy concepts that allow us to cast a wide net over a variety of resources while considering ways to verify what we receive. So, this screenshot here is a glimpse of how we approach the Civic Lab for different age groups in the library. You'll see in the column list headings, we have everywhere from youth age 0 to 5 to adults. And then on the left-hand side, we have developed the various opportunities that are available for civic engagement throughout our library. So it's not only limited to the lab, of course, which are our pop-up events, but also other skill-building opportunities like workshops or service-based opportunities that happen throughout our community. We noticed that particular developmental stages and interests also affect the way that we share information and in turn engage folks. We know for kids, they're most engaged when there's a fun interactive component like a matching game. For teens, we know that they feel most engaged when a topic feels personally relevant to their lives and their identities. And for adults, we see that same strong desire to intellectually connect and analyze, and essentially taking on that lifelong learning and being mindful of how it applies to what they might hear or see in the news. Above all, we try to make space for diverse perspectives. We recognize the value and the ultimate necessity for ensuring that we can make space to accommodate the ways in which people come into our building and in our setting, understanding that they have different life experiences that inform what they may be going through. We also understand that staff as well have different life experiences and ways that they engage. This picture was taken during an event that I, on the far right of the slide, helped out with. My supervisors, the woman in the blue, with the glasses leaning towards another teenager, and we had assembled together as part of a series called Together at the Table, where for some hours of a certain day, several times a year, we would open up our primary meeting room space and have table tents in which we would ask folks questions so that they could better get to know one another, but also to engage in some of the critical topical conversations of the time. And in this instance, we were engaging with teens. The background of the Civic Lab. Throughout the general election of 2016 in the United States, we noticed an increased interest amongst staff to discuss current events, as well as a marked uptick in questions from patrons at different service points regarding information they had seen on the news or on their social media feeds. In response, we saw a really wonderful opportunity to think more broadly about ways that we can support community members. This became the first iteration of the Civic Lab. It ran from late August through November of 2016. It was a semi-static installation that was intended to bring together community members with a selection of resources and discussion around 6 core issues that we found were of special interest to our community. These issues included Black Lives Matter, climate change, immigration and migration, income inequality, LGBTQI+, and reproductive justice. Micro collections of books for different age groups were featured in that space, as well as conversation starters, open-ended questions such as, what is your family's migration story? Where does income inequality come from in your community and what it might look like? As you can see in the photo, we also assembled a table with little cubes that were intended for folks to sit down and write their thoughts. Put a pin in those cubes because they come in handy later. So we also used a cube specifically for people to insert anonymized responses to prompts that we would have related to the 6 topic areas. So for example, this one allowed patrons to engage on the topic of Black Lives Matter with a prompt asking, do Black Lives Matter in Skokie and what barriers or inequalities exist locally? We found, though, that this approach didn't work as well unless we actively promoted participation via other channels. Moreover, we noticed that this didn't allow the project to reach its engagement goals with the same impact and resonance as an in-person interaction. The boutique also featured a voting space where patrons could passively engage with a Post-it note and not even connect with a staff member. Each week, this display was changed to a different question that corresponded with one of the focus areas community members cited as a concern for them. Through the experience of hosting the boutique, we discovered that while visual displays are powerful, it is in fact content paired with human interaction that's critical for deepening any inquiry on civic engagement. Similarly, postcards originally devised for the purpose of encouraging contemplation and reflection really weren't as effective. And we found that instead we do continue to gather feedback and we invite passive participation during pop-ups and other events. Certainly during presentations given by speakers, not every patron in the room is giving a comment or a question. But we also see that people will want to respond and reflect in other ways, and we don't necessarily have to use a static approach like a postcard to invite that. Through our experiences with both the boutique and subsequent pop-ups over the past few years, we realized that issues aren't comprised of only opposing perspectives and viewpoints. We realized the importance of seeing our contemporary lives with nuance from multiple positionalities. We are creating a foundation for building knowledge and awareness, and that can only happen over time. Therefore, we ask our colleagues to seek out resources that can move beyond that pro-con, are you with us or are you not argument, and can encompass a range of disciplines. So our current civic engagement practices. I'm going to give you an overview of where we've taken the Civic Lab since its humble beginning in the boutique. So, our pop-ups. These events offer information and thought-provoking activities to support dialogue and engagement on issues that affect our community. These events are curated and planned as responses to topics and events in the news. In this picture, what you're going to see is the same crates that I mentioned being used as props for some of the prompts that I indicated earlier as a part of our whiteboard, as well as a place to put books and laptop that might show a video. We also have staff. In this picture, there are 3 different staff members that are engaging with patrons around the central question, as well as a banner. The team of Civic Lab leads work with other staff to identify potential pop-up topics and research resources for handouts. Topics are archived to our website along with their respective handouts. These handouts act as one-page starter kits of resources, and they typically feature a variety of books, articles, podcasts, videos, and other resources that demonstrate diverse perspectives. When the library is open, we offer one Civic Lab pop-up per month. Such pop-ups are listed on our events calendar and other in-house events publications. We strive to use varied learning styles. We recognize no matter what age you are or background you are from, everyone has a different approach to understanding. And so therefore, we try to ensure that we use a variety of options for people to opt in and learn. For each display, we offer opportunities to participate via a discussion prompt, which is written on a whiteboard or on large white Post-its. And we use other visuals like digital media in the form of videos or print media like photographs. We also have a curated selection of books, films, and other relevant objects culled from our collection to tie it all together. And we also use activities like matching games that indicate how much someone could know about a topic. So, for example, we had a pop-up called Actually She Did That, in which we tried to highlight accomplishments that had been achieved by women throughout history in honor of National Women's History Month, but for some reason had not gotten their fair due and often were attributed to very much a man. And we found that that process allowed people to think a little more deeply about why is it that this woman or these women identifying people were not given their proper respect or attribution when coming up with this idea or this innovation. We recognize that there's an urgency of news as it happens, and we also know that as library staff, we should be able to respond and share out when appropriate. Rapid responses are pop-ups that aren't always advertised on our calendar and don't have a dedicated handout necessarily developed for them. We've experimented with rapid response pop-ups. During such pop-ups, staff will engage on a pressing topic with a set of go-to news resources. And then we will also provide opportunities to explore how we use those go-to news resources, either with an iPad stand with an iPad that is on there, which you see the two patrons looking at, or we'll use a laptop to demonstrate how we might use some of our more evidence-based and, if applicable, peer-reviewed information sources to verify what we're finding out. A whiteboard on wheels is sometimes used to immediately address patron concerns as well as diagram what we might learn at that pop-up as we go along. We found that the rapid response is a flexible format. It allows us to address more current affairs without disrupting too many colleagues and procedures or bypassing our general structure for patron engagement. So let's talk about the ways we gather, activate, and debrief staff involved with the Civic Lab and what it takes to pop up. For a pop-up to take place, we not only have the materials I've mentioned already, a banner, whiteboard, handout of resources, interactive component, a curated sampling of objects relevant to the pop-up, but also facilitation. Staff interaction is critical to the success of our pop-up, and in order to activate these spaces for some critical inquiry, we need to ensure staff feel prepared to confidently speak about the topic at large. Confidence does not necessarily equal a penultimate expertise or a specific perspective. Rather, confidence in this case includes the ability to find and cite credible information that can be reliably sourced and vetted. Our intention is for patrons to walk away equipped with reputable, diverse information sources so that they can also begin to formulate their own opinions and/or actions. When planning a pop-up, we articulate clear goals, i.e. through this pop-up, patrons will learn about. We gather relevant news, first-person experiences, statistical analyses, experiential sources, and much more. We also discuss our personal biases and how that can impact what we select and how we present such information. Being aware of our own biases allows us to account for any lapses we may experience while gathering sources and sharing them with patrons. So here's a snapshot of how we organize ourselves between, during, and after pop-ups. The Civic Lab curatorial team members take turns running and coordinating bi-monthly meetings where we discuss upcoming pop-ups as well as debrief and share notes on how past pop-ups went. We use the tool Basecamp to archive and document what we have done for each handout, as well as post notes that reflect upon how each pop-up went. The writing of those notes is especially important as it helps us understand how we might revisit a topic in the future or tweak an idea. You'll notice that we also have a sidebar where we delineate what each role means so that in case of staff turnover or organizational change, we can easily refer to this listing and adjust as needed to help our team during growing pains, as I like to call them. Topics for upcoming Civic Lab pop-ups often emerge via resources that staff share, whether books, articles, podcasts, or more, with the understanding that they might be used in a future handout. We engage fellow colleagues as much as we want to engage patrons. We recognize that the interactions we have at public service points or programs are touch points for further exploration. Such connections are invaluable for solidifying our team-based approach to learning and exchange. So, how do you activate staff? We are intentionally comprised of staff from different departments. We recognize that the work we do would be incomplete without varied expertise of individuals who approach topics from unique experiences. We try to make it easy to bring an idea from another program into the setting. We try to encourage people on the curatorial team to engage with other colleagues within their departments and find out what's on people's minds, or if they heard something from their neighbors or from patrons while they were passing by. We think about how each library job could relate, such as a collection specialist bringing up resources or books that have specifically addressed a certain topic and how that might be signaling a trend. Or we look towards reference staff and some of the questions they might have received at a desk. We also are very intentional in trying to recognize that, yes, we may work in experiential or expertise silos, but that we all have a responsibility to address the values of our institution. So understanding how the personal can be political. I mentioned that understanding our personal biases is useful. We strive to be nonpartisan, but as human beings, we can't fully separate the personal from the political. In the case of the Civic Lab, we try to incorporate personal interests and experiences when possible. For example, a library staff member who participated in demonstrations at Standing Rock. And if you're not familiar, Standing Rock was the site of an enormous protest in 2017 in which a company and the government wanted to install a pipeline for oil. And it would, of course, go across very sacred territory as well as potentially pollute the waters, which it actually did. So the staff member I mentioned had participated in a demonstration at Standing Rock in North Dakota on their personal time, of course, and not affiliated with the library. But he was present at that pop-up to facilitate a conversation and added another perspective of being a participant during such demonstrations. So over the course of popping up with the Civic Lab, we found that pop-ups can be divided into 4 types. These 4 main areas include timely topics to put the news into context, civic literacy, issues in the news, and news literacy. So, how to incorporate current events happening in your community? Pardon me. So, we recognize that the library does not exist in a vacuum. Instead, what we want to note is that it is integral that we recognize how we engage with our public. We recognize that, indeed, events happening with our community partners are just as valid in informing how to, if not more so valid, in informing how to respond. So, for example, each year in the past, when we were open and we were allowed to congregate in open spaces with other human beings, the library partners with our local chapter of the YWCA to host an annual Stand Against Racism. In previous years, we hosted pop-up events in which community members could take part in the annual demonstration of showing solidarity with anti-racism efforts, and then come into the library for conversations on what such actionable items might happen out of such a demonstration. We also emphasize civic literacy. Community members are seeking ways to increase their knowledge and confidence around civic literacy, and so in response, we will pop up issues like how does the Supreme Court work, or what is the Environmental Protection Agency. We expand upon timely topics. Public events and gatherings at the library focus on such topics in a traditional setting at times, where an expert comes to share their ideas and understanding, while an audience of patrons are gathered around them. Civic Lab Pop-Ups create an additional layer of space to expand upon these topics and invite engagement in patron-driven conversations on topics like what is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Act, federal or state taxes, and as I mentioned previously, National Women's History Month. At the core of our pop-ups is our desire to support community members in developing their news and information literacy skills so that they can better access, study, and make informed decisions using reputable information. Towards that end, we popped up on topics such as what is journalism and what isn't, for example. A few lessons were learned. We saw that it was really important for us to have a clear facilitator and at minimum have 2 staff members present for each pop-up so that it doesn't just look like a random staff member in the hallway. We try to pop up in heavily trafficked spaces. We understand that our approach matters, so we look at patrons in the eye, even if some of them don't really want to stop and talk with us. We offer to share information about the topic. We ask questions. We also know for staff that it is really important to ensure we have enough capacity, so we ask for staff who are on the curatorial team to focus on one topic at a time versus developing multiple Civic Lab pop-ups at once. So it would be wrong of me not to mention how the outbreak of COVID-19 is affecting our institutions and our information supply chain overall. Now, more than ever, we can and should connect and imagine a better future in which we're equipped with verifiable information, where we can make informed decisions starting with ourselves and then radiate beyond to our communities and leaders. We can make a difference. Certainly, the library I work at, Skokie Public Library, has been closed since March 14th. The state in which I reside, Illinois, has had a shelter-in-place order since the beginning of, since the end of March, and it still continues through May. There has been an uptick of cases of COVID-19. There has not been adequate testing, and we are unsure in many ways as to what the fate of our in-person engagement will be. Ellen previously mentioned that we took the Civic Lab to Twitter, and that had some mixed results. It certainly is not the same as engaging with our community members in person. And like some libraries, we have not had a demonstrative online audience in the past, so it was not necessarily developed the same way. So we definitely have things to work through in terms of the future for what the Civic Lab could look like. I am hopeful that we will have more opportunities to engage with our public, our beloved community in person. But for the time being, we are trying to encourage social distancing and encourage us to stay aware and informed and make really crucial decisions because ultimately they have a big effect on people's lives. And crucial decision making does not mean that we tell people how to act or behave, but rather that they make those decisions based on good information that they find. So with that, I want to thank you and open it up to questions. I hope I have covered as much as I could. Any of the questions that you have that I didn't cover, please let me know, and I'd be happy to go ahead.
Thank you, Mimosa. That was great. Maybe you'd like to share your video so people can see you while you're answering the questions?
Yes, of course. One moment while I prep myself.
And there've been a couple of questions coming through the chat, and just so you don't need to scroll back up a lot, one person asked, are there dedicated staff for Civic Labs or is it the general library staff?
Sure, one moment. Hi, everyone. So this is actually staff throughout the library. It's not dedicated to just the Civic Lab. So I'm part of this department called Learning Experiences, and we are folks who are tasked with essentially overseeing all public events at the library. There are folks who are collection development specialists. There's reference librarians. We even have our administrative assistant to the executive director on the team. She brings a lot of specialized knowledge as well as her experiences as a native Spanish language speaker to the table, which is really important. So it's a collaborative effort. It's done in addition to what we are already doing, but it's spread out in such a way that it's not considered a specific task we do on a regular daily basis.
And there was another question asking, do you get arguments or hostility from the community about the pop-ups?
Periodically, we will have patrons who aren't necessarily hostile, but they will disagree. We are fortunate, though, in that we've never had anyone be truly argumentative or get in the way of our space. We find that it is really valuable to have boundaries delineated. So if indeed there are patrons who are not behaving in accordance with our appropriate use policies, then we have safety staff on hand to help us de-escalate situations. We are always very steadfast in sharing out that we're here to provide information. We're not here to be oppositional or confrontational. Of course, I think that there are patrons in our community who don't like what we might have to say or disagree. And in those cases, they don't necessarily even approach us. So I think there are some missed opportunities when it comes to how we may be able to diffuse those individual situations where people are really fired up. Certainly, what's happening in the United States right now with so many different states that are trying to deal with whether they should reopen or not. We see a lot of confrontational opportunities there, and we wonder how indeed we can reopen. And I can anticipate that there will be some disagreement as to how to proceed with regards to containing the spread of COVID-19. Any other questions? I'm going to scroll back in the chat to see if I missed anything. And of course, I completely understand about the technological difficulties. Using these tools is new, and using them in this way is new. I see a question here. Do we post Civic Lab issues on social media? So we certainly advertise and promote the Civic Lab. We actually have a really wonderful Instagram account for the library, and recently we posted a couple of Instagram stories where different staff members who are involved with the Civic Lab recorded basic information about what is COVID-19, what is the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic. So if you are a user of Instagram, then, for example, you will be able to navigate to the Skokie Library account, and I'm going to show you very briefly from my own smartphone what it looks like. So this is, you may not be able to see it given the glare, so my apologies. But essentially, we have stories dedicated to COVID-19. We also have some Instagram stories related to the decennial census, which is also incredible and important. The U.S. has been undertaking every 10 years they have a census, and of course it's happening during one of the worst times ever, but it is really important for everyone to be counted. So we've been trying to share out information as to how folks can be counted. I see another question here. Was Civic Lab suggested by management or was it inspired by librarians in the field? Good point. We actually, it came about through our department. There were several individuals, some of whom are no longer there. They've moved on to other institutions, and some who are still there, who found that through brainstorming, one of the ways that we could better engage and connect with our community members was through talking about the issues, not hiding them, being really frank about what is our library doing, what is our role with regards to all of these different issues that are erupting before our eyes. And certainly the tenor of our national discourse changed a lot throughout the general election of 2016. And there were new terminologies that were created in the wake of it. Fake news, alternative facts. These are things that really didn't have the same currency, much like now where WFH, or work from home, has been entered into the Merriam-Webster dictionary. That indeed is another way that language has evolved, and similarly, we as library workers are evolving to meet where our community is at. We were fortunate to have the support of our management, but it was not suggested by them exclusively. And I was going to drop it into the chat. If anyone wants to connect with me, they can certainly do so at my email address, which I will type for you here. Sorry for the loud noises if you hear that, as well as my Twitter handle, which is a public account, which Ellen and I have been corresponding through that account as well. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on how you might want to develop this at your library?
Ellen here again. I certainly seem to be getting a lot of people quite enthusiastic, but I would be interested to know if people were considering it as part of their pop-ups for their libraries. It is a lovely combination of nice pop-up tools, but also about the staff and the collections. I really like the way you're tying the collections in to it all. So I'd also love to hear if people are considering either combining it with existing pop-ups or working out how they can do it once libraries here are able to reopen again too.
I noticed there's a question about online public meetings be an option. So we, as our library, have taken some of our in-person events and made them into live Zoom events, as well as pre-recorded audio or video. We've not had public meetings in the same way. Certainly, you could pop up at a public meeting once your community decides to reopen. I'm not sure what the extent of closures are right now in Australia and certainly in New South Wales or wherever you are located. But I do think that there is a certain amount of possibility. And prior to COVID-19 and its outbreak, we had actually contemplated taking the Civic Lab outdoors and going to, our local mall or the municipality's green and just popping up with information and resources. We are fortunate to have a wonderful bookmobile that goes to different spots in the community on designated days. So we were also thinking of popping up there. But we, of course, have put that on hold. I see a couple of other comments here. Yes, you also have closed libraries, so right, yeah. We're just waiting, hoping that we can eventually go back and do these things, but we also want to do it when it's safe to do so. There was a comment here about time and resourcing with limited staff. Absolutely. I would say that, you iterate in the small ways that you can. You start small, maybe do one pop-up every few months, or maybe do a shorter pop-up. Not all of the components I mentioned are required. I do think a handout is really lovely to have as a way to say, hey, you want to dip a toe into this topic? Here you go. And those handouts are archived on our website under the Civic Lab. And if you like, I can show you how to navigate to that, or I can just simply link it to you in an email, Ellen. And I also see here that there is enthusiasm for doing it at different libraries. Someone said, yes, please, about how to navigate to the website. I'm just going to go here very quickly and do a quick screen share once more. So I apologize for the transition. One moment. So this is our library. And you can see here, I hope you can see that is, and I'm going to block my video out temporarily. So one moment. All right, so can you see my screen? You can see this is our website, skokilibrary.info, and I go under resources, and I can see under Learn and Explore, there's Civic Lab, and then it goes ahead to past events where we popped up. So for example, Ellen mentioned how we went on Twitter and had a Civic Lab chat because we wanted to differentiate that from our in-person events. So if you were to click on that, then you can see getting the facts on coronavirus, the handout is there as well, and it takes you to a PDF, and it gives you some key definitions, conversation questions, as well as resources that we culled for that particular pop-up. We often try to include a video, some type of audio, and then a variety of articles. As you can see, we also looked at things that were important for caregivers, like how to talk with children about COVID-19. And of course, this pop-up happened in early April, and so much has been coming out since then about COVID-19. I was actually reading an article in the Washington Post this morning about how so many different aspects of COVID-19 are not understood the same way as doctors previously thought it would be, because of the nature of how the virus is affecting different cells in our bodies and different systems. Was there a specific topic that gained greater community engagement? No, good question. I think some of our evergreen topics, like, how does the Supreme Court work? That was really interesting to a lot of people who didn't know, certainly with the appointment of several current U.S. Supreme Court justices. There was controversy, and that subsequent controversy led to questions about how does this actually happen? How does a president or the executive have authority to do this, etc. There was also anything that is related to things that are happening in our immediate community are also things that garner incredible enthusiasm and engagement. Another question here, do different staff volunteer to collate information on a specific topic and suggest it, or is it one person's responsibility to choose topics and allocate topics to staff? So actually it is a mixture of that. So yes, different staff volunteer to come together and work on a specific pop-up. So we'll have one or two different key staff designated to think about that topic. And you might have seen in a different slide, I showed you the Civic Lab curatorial team roles. And amidst that, we also have topics listed, and we'll assign each other to a topic, but that anyone can suggest resources on the topic, even if they're not affiliated with the pop-up. And we also take recommendations from staff members throughout the building. It's not just limited to us. We actually had a very interesting pop-up several years ago in 2017 on it happened because of the different immigration orders that were happening around who could come in and when, and there were protests at airports. And one of our staff members was actually incarcerated in the 1940s, or rather their family was, and that staff member was born in an incarceration camp. They're Japanese American, and they had a very interesting story to share at the pop-up, and their level of resources and understanding is certainly going to be very different than what I or my colleagues would have gathered in that situation. I also could see this ending really well for your next election. There's community confusion about voting and preferential processes and lending. So yes, absolutely. It's a great way to start at those conversations. I wish that we could have a really more frank discussion as to who gets to share information and in what venues are we reporting how we understand the disease of COVID-19, which isn't happening as much. My Monday, your Tuesday, there was a press conference with the president, in which there was some concern about how the country is dealing with the outbreak, and in fact, that press conference ended suddenly because there was disagreement as to some of the questions voiced by journalists. So I would love to, if we were to restart and go back into the building, to find ways like how does the very process of who gets to share information and when affect the way we receive it. Any other questions? There's a question here, do the handouts have specific information or lists of resources or both? So we do have specific information in terms of key terms. We often refer to a dictionary. We'll be very specific on where we got what we got. For example, we did a pop-up on gender identity and expression, and we actually didn't use the Merriam-Webster dictionary because we found those definitions to be far too limiting when it comes to understanding gender. And so we were very clear about where we got definitions and such. Lists of resources, absolutely. We also include a small annotation because it can be daunting to just get a list of links. So we always try to indicate what something is, like this is a podcast or this is a so-and-so. It's like getting a listicle from a really good friend about what's going on and how to get at something. Or if you subscribe to e-newsletters that are short and sweet, that might be kind of what our resource pages could look like. All right. Anything else that's top of mind for you locally? Okay, is it only library staff that choose the topics, or do you reach out to the community? No, we actually we do get feedback from community members as to things they'd like to learn about. Sometimes it can be a public event that we're hosting, and we realize that there were questions around a particular issue, like what is the Environmental Protection Agency? Yes, ultimately it is library staff that determine how they want to pop up, but we also take into account our community. We actually had a pop-up happen following the death by suicide of several major celebrities, and recognized that there were people in our community who are also dealing with issues with their loved ones. And we worked with a local outpatient mental health clinic to stage a series of pop-ups on resources one could use to deal with depression, mental health, and suicide. You are welcome. I am very happy to be here and to be able to share out information with you. It is interesting to be talking with people without seeing them. I think that's one of the real limitations of the devices, but at least we can create a theater of the mind for a little bit.
Ellen, again, any further questions or comments from Mimosa? I think this has been fabulous, and looking at all your chat comments, that certainly reinforces that. I will be very interested to see what pops up around New South Wales following this. Possibly more when our libraries are able to open again, but maybe there are other opportunities as well. But yes, any further questions for Mimosa? And if there aren't, please join with me in thanking her for this presentation today.
Oh, you are all most welcome. I hope you all stay safe and well and healthy. This is unprecedented. I know that there have been many other catastrophes affecting your country in other ways prior to this, but this is the one that's most top of mind, and you are all welcome. Thank you for taking time to listen to me and inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I'm more than happy to answer questions via email, or if you want to find me on Twitter, that's great too. Thank you again. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, well, next up, yep, that was fabulous, wasn't it? Well, next up, we've got Louise Garbus from Climate Data Bureau of Meteorology, but we've got 1 minute for people to do whatever stretches they find most helpful when they've been sitting for an hour, and then see you back here at 10:30 to hear from Louise. So we've got Louise on now, but just do 1 minute of quick stretches so that you're really going to enjoy the next hour. Okay, Ellen again. That was fabulous hearing from Mimosa, and it certainly sounds like the Civic Labs at Skokie Library is a very exciting project. Here we get to hear about a really exciting data service. The Bureau of Meteorology has incredible data sets, and so Louise Garbus from the Climate Data Services Bureau of Meteorology is going to help us to better use the climate data that is available. This is a key resource that your community can use, and it's all free. So I'll hand over to Louise now. Thank you so much, Louise.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Thanks for inviting me here today, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. It's fairly informal. I'm just going to run through some of the weather data sets that we've got through our climate data online pages at the Bureau of Meteorology. And I'll start out by saying that it's a very small subset of what's available. But for the general public, it does cover quite a lot of their sort of interests and inquiries. So I'll start with the climate data online. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them up as we go through. Otherwise, I'm happy to take emails or phone calls at a later date as well. I do have a presentation which I'll start with, and you're welcome to, is that not clear? Is anyone else having any issues hearing that? Microphone. Is that any better?
From the chat coming through, everyone's saying the sound's really good.
Okay, great. I'll keep going. Thank you. So I'll start off with my PowerPoint presentation. There's quite a few slides to get through, and it's more just, I'm going to be doing through our website as well. It's more just to prompt me to make sure I don't forget anything. So I shall share my screen. And we'll go to, okay, can everybody see that? Is that okay? Just jump in if anyone's having any issues. So the climate data online is what we're talking about. I'll briefly just describe what it is, where to find it, a bit of background about the Bureau weather stations and the data that's included, a few of the basic functions, for example, just viewing the data and downloading it, and obviously if you can't work it out, where you can go to get a bit more help. There is some other sources of basic data I was going to show you that will depend on how we go with time. So as I sort of said at the start, it really is only basic data. And what I mean by that is our daily and our monthly rainfall, temperature, solar exposure. So they're the three main data sets. It's through all records, whether a site is opened or whether it's closed. We also have some summary tables which have a bit more information than just that. That does include some wind, evaporation, cloud, a few other bits and pieces, but that's only for recent periods. For the past 13 months, we have what we call a climate calendar, and that's sort of like looking up a particular date, and it's used for event planning. People want to know the best day to have their wedding. It's, yeah, we use it around a week because we don't like to have averages on a particular day, but I can explain a little bit more about that. And lastly, climate statistics, and that's like average sort of weather. Just quickly, there's a lot of data in the Bureau's database. We're looking at the station data. There were or have been over time around 20,000 weather stations. So all the rainfall and temperature from 20,000 sites is available. But bear in mind, over time, that number changes. So at the moment, there's only about 7,000 open. 2,500 of those are real time, and what that means is we're getting the data each day on the day. So if someone wants to know what happened yesterday, there's about 2,500 sites that will have that information. The remaining open ones are usually manual sites, and they need to write down things on pieces of paper and send them in, and we get it several months later. Also, our automatic weather stations, these ones are continuous. They're reporting every minute, all throughout the day, and they're obviously available as it happens. And this last number, 85, this is relating to where we have a staff member or a trained observer, can be a member of the community, where they are at a weather station and they are looking out at the sky and telling us what's happening. So visual observations, and unfortunately that's things like hail and thunderstorms, it is snow, anything that a weather station can't measure, where we need to have a person with eyes. This number, unfortunately, is going down. And to be honest, I can see it decreasing significantly further than what it already is. We seem to be replacing them with automatic weather stations, which are great for real-time data, but we are losing a lot of that manual type of observations. And that also includes evaporation and sunshine, which we'll lose as well. So changes are coming. Okay, so just briefly how we get to climate data online. I'm going to escape out of the PowerPoint presentation and just go through it via the website. I've just got this here in case you need to have it for reference. So we'll go back and I'll go onto the Bureau's webpage. You might be familiar with this website. Up the top, we've got the satellite image of what's happening. We have the weather that's happening right now around the country, and then we have our services. And in this Our Services section, there's the climate and past weather. Again, there's lots of information in climate. Today, we're particularly looking at weather and climate data. And this is the welcome page for climate data online. When I speak to people on the phone, and we do get a lot of people on the phone, a lot of them are elderly or not comfortable using computers. So if I go back to the home page, I don't take them through the climate page. I go all the way to the bottom of the page. There is a direct link, climate data online, in the footer. So that's how we find it. That's what it looks like. There are two options to use to get the data, using text here and using map here. To be honest, the map tool is pretty awful. It's clunky, it's outdated, we really need to update it. When I'm talking to people on the phone, I don't use this option. I start with the text. And it's a simple three-step tool. Here we select what data we want. There are our options. I'm just going to start with daily rainfall, just because that's the most common. Step 2, you type in a location, so let's go Canberra. Click on the Find button. It goes and finds latitudes and longitudes for all the Canberras in Australia. Obviously, there's only one, but there are a few little versions, but we'll just highlight that. Now going to search Bureau stations based on the latitude and longitude that we've selected. And it defaults to the open stations. If someone is after data from the 1950s or something like that, the site might have been closer. That's now closed. You can see that one there is closed, Monica Oval. Once you highlight a site, it does populate this little graph and it gives you an idea of the type of data at that site. So I've highlighted Canberra Parliament House. Looks like there's data from around the late 50s and to current. You can select any year here. We'll just leave it as the current year. And the station number, which has been populated from our selection up here, is ready to go. Simply click data and it will open up a new window. So I selected 2020. There's a couple of things to notice about this. Well, firstly, just quickly what we're looking at, days down the page, months across the page. The one we've selected, which is the Parliament House site, this one is not a real-time site. It is open, you can see that up here. Our observer writes it down and sends in his records once he's ready. We don't be too forceful with our observers because if we are, we lose them and we would rather them come in late than not at all. So you can sort of see here that it goes to early April. A couple of things to note, it's in italics, which means our data has not been through quality control. There's all sorts of things you can pick up just by looking at the data table. Most you don't need to really worry about. One thing you do need to worry about with rainfall, and it gets everybody and it's understandable. When you see a value, for example, the 10th of March of 8.2 millimetres, that's measured at 9 a.m. on the 10th of March. It's a 24-hour total up to that time. So most of that rain actually fell on the 9th of March, and it's more indicative of rainfall on the 9th of March. So our rainfall is made at 9 a.m. and it's for the previous 24 hours. So some of our clients do get a bit confused by that, and that's fair enough. I still have to read that every now and then to remind myself. Well, not really, but just keep that in mind. Only things here that you probably would be interested in is the fact that you can use these links at the top here, and one allows you to put it in a printable format if someone wants to print out the data. There has the Bureau logo, and it also includes some statistics over all the years at the bottom of the page. So that's quite a useful link. The other two links at the top allow the user to put it into an Excel spreadsheet. So if you have someone that's wanting to draw graphs and plots, that's a really useful little link there. I think that's all we need to speak to for that one. Just just going back to our climate data online page. I will briefly show you how this one works. It's pretty intuitive. With the map tool, you select what data you want. This time we'll look at daily weather observations. And you can either zoom or you can type in a location. I wonder if this is going to work. As I say, it is a little bit doing something. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in on the map. And you see these little squares. And you hover over them, they should give you information about the site. Oh, this is terrible, this tool. In fact, I think I'm going to skip this section altogether. You're welcome to have a play in your own time. It does bring up the same information. And in fact, I'd like to show quickly the weather and climate page, because this is actually quite useful. Okay, so back to Canberra. And I'm now getting the data. Okay, what we have here is just the observations for the current month. We're in May, so we've got the first days from 1 down to 12, and it includes basic information for each day. We've got temperatures, your minimum and maximum, your rainfall. Again, that's the same rainfall measured at 9 AM on that day for the previous 24 hours. Got the strongest wind gusts for that day. And then we've got the next block of data, which is the 9 AM observations, and the final block of data, which is the 3 PM observations. And you'll see it does include a little bit more information, such as cloud, humidity, wind, pressure. Now, Canberra Airport doesn't record evaporation and sunshine. If it did, it would be there. There's very few sites that do, unfortunately. You're pretty much limited to Sydney Airport and some of the main airports or staff sites. With this option, a couple of things to take note of is it does bring up the current month, which is May. I mentioned there's 13 months. It's actually 13 months plus whatever's there, so they say 14. The links to the other months are down below in this other times and other places. You can see full data sets for each of the months. Again, if your clients are needing to print this, we recommend the PDF version. It just puts it on a simple page, makes it easy to print, has the logo and all the information you need there. If the writing is in red, it means it's the hottest or the strongest or the highest. And if the writing is in blue, it means it's the coldest or the lowest or the weakest or the lightest wind. So there's a few colour coding just to help interpret that sort of table. And again, sticking with our weather and climate, I'm going to jump over. Are there any questions? Sorry, I'll pause there just to see. Yeah. Sorry if we don't. Yeah. We actually get authors of our books, authors of books writing to us regularly about historical data for settings and also to pick out events. At the moment, we've got a playwright trying to do something in Hamilton Island and they want one when there's a cyclone and things like that. So, yeah, used by a lot of people you'd never even imagine, actually. Yeah. Anyway, just back to the statistics. I mentioned we have a daily climate calendar, and I'll just type Sydney this time and change location. We'll go to the airport just because it does have a good record. Yeah, as I say, for this page, our climate calendar is for a particular day, a given day. So I've selected today's date. Wedding planners for individuals or people wanting to know what it's going to be like on a particular day. As climate scientists, we don't like to have averages on a day because a day is very variable. It's not really related to each other on a day-to-day basis. That's why we keep our statistics generally as a month because there's more. It's more grouped by months, I guess. But people still are interested in this data, so we do provide it. So we have the first block, which is the typical weather around the 12th of May, and that looks at the week. So that day, plus 3 days earlier and 3 days later to get the 7 days, and what the average is for the 12th of May. So normally in Sydney at the airport, average maximum is 20.5, minimum 11.4, rainfall 2.2. But as you can see here, 2/3 of the days are dry, no rain, and then there's some statistics about getting other amounts of rainfall. And then the second section is just on this particular day. The highest temperature we've ever had on the 12th of May was a 28.3. A few other bits and pieces down there. There's usually a little story about on this day. That's not related to the site you've selected. That's relating to Australia as a whole, and they'll just pick out something of interest. So that's the daily calendar. And the monthly one, which I find is probably one of our most used resource from here. These are our statistics, and you will have seen maps and all sorts of different ways to show the statistics, excuse me. So we start off with the temperature data, your mean, minimum and maximum. Again, we're colour coded, red for the highest and blue for the lowest. We've also got the annual figures at the end. So each month across, the elements down. If you're not sure what it means, i.e. what is the number of clear days, you can click on it and it brings up information about each of the statistics. So there's a few different things here. One interesting thing for some of our planners, they like to know what the wind usually does, especially if someone's about to leave Botany Bay and go canoeing off to New Zealand. These little icons bring up wind roses, and this shows the general direction. Oh, that one did, not sure what happened there. General direction of wind from Sydney Airport. So this one, I think I clicked on the annual one. So this is averaged over all months. At 3 p.m, you either get a northeasterly, that would be indicative of a sea breeze, or a southeasterly. We don't get a lot of winds from the direct north, or in fact even the west over the full year. If I was to look at that at different times of year, you would get a different chart, obviously. I don't know if that's going to work. Yeah, so summer, particularly in summer, that's particularly strong because that's a northeast sea breeze, which are more prevalent in the summer months. The other thing on this page, which is useful, we're just looking at a very brief number here of statistics. Some people really love this and love looking into it a bit more detail. You can click on the all available. This actually brings up a lot of data. I'm just going to quickly scroll through so you can see how long this table is. So they're still just summaries, but they just include a little bit more. So before we had the mean highest temperature, now we've got the highest ever and the date that occurred. And then same sort of thing for the lows. We've got a few different statistics options, decile 1 and decile 9, looking at different hot day thresholds, and the same again for minimum. A few other bits and pieces in there as well. Wind, sunshine, clear, cloudy, evaporation, 9 a.m. Observations and 3 p.m. observations. With these also, and this is the same as the summary page we just looked at, there is a plot icon at the end of each row. When you click on that, that allows you to see same data plotted on a graph. And if you want to know how 2018 fared in comparison to the average, you can overlay that. And you can see 2018 was generally warmer than average pretty much throughout the month, except for maybe, throughout the year, except for maybe in October, looks to be a little bit cooler. Data down in the tables below. You can compare different sites. You can look at different statistics. So there's a whole different range of options within the actual climate statistic table. For these sorts of things, I do recommend people just get in there and play. You know, we could spend all day just looking at one table. So it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of information. Knowing how to find it is the challenge. And really the best way to find it is just getting in there and clicking away and see what you can find. So I'm just looking back at the questions. So I've got my screen back up again. The farmers find it very useful. In fact, we've got a whole page on our Bureau page dedicated to just agriculture. So they do use this, but they've got another page as well that has even more information, like evaporation and soil moisture and other things that are particularly useful for the agriculture industry. Hit numbers, I'm not sure, to be honest. We do get updates of hit numbers. Our web page definitely soars during events. So for flooding and cyclones and any sort of large weather events, we get enormous amount of hits. I think we're the number, was like top 5. I'm thinking even number 2. Don't quote me on that. I'm not quite sure. But and that's in Australia of all websites, not just government ones. So it's very, very popular. Okay, so they're just the basic functions for the climate data online tool, but there's just a couple of other things that do help with this. One thing I'll mention briefly, we did look at the daily weather observation table, which is the past 13 months of what's been going on. That's great, but so many people want data prior to 13 months, and unless it's rainfall or temperature, it's not in this little tool. However, our good friends at the National Library of Australia, in their Trove archive, have kindly created an archive for us. So although we don't have it on our website, they're still available. Each archive date contains links to the past 12, 13 months of data. So it's slightly different interface, but it's the same information. So the Sydney Airport, we go into New South Wales. Beautiful fiddly. F for Sydney. F for Sydney, no, Sydney Airport, sorry. You get your table here. This will be August 18, which was the archive date that I clicked on initially. They archive it around the 23rd, 24th, towards the end of August, but you'll see there the data is not complete for August. So just, if people are interested in August, go to the archive date after that, because if you scroll down again, similar to the last page we were looking at, there's the previous months below. So you can see back 13 months before the date that I clicked on during the archive, with that date of archive. The only thing to note, so the functionality is still the same, got the PDF versions. The only thing with these pages, and we do try and make sure people are aware, once they're archived, that's it, how they're stored, and that's fine in most cases. In some cases, data will undergo further quality control, and if things are deemed wrong or suspect, they're flagged, they could be removed. They will still be shown on here, so the user won't see that something's been quality controlled after. In most cases, it's not an issue. Every now and then something will pop up. So that's that archive. The other thing I would like to show you. So going back to the start again and back into climate and past weather, and we were in weather and climate data for the Climate Data Online tool. A lot of our clients ring because they need to know a date for thunderstorm and its insurance claim. And these are often people that, again, are not comfortable using computers. They don't know how to find whether or not there's storms, which is fair enough because it's actually quite difficult. It's not easy. We have got a little service on here. It's a storm confirmation tool. It's the most simple tool you can ever use. It's in our data services section, and it's called the Storm Confirmer. And it is a very simple tool where you type in a location. You've got to select from the list that comes up for any of those, and you enter a date. Let's say the 20th of January, and you select it from the list. Click on Submit. Simply goes off and searches. We have a database of lightning strikes, we're not allowed to provide the lightning strike data to people because it's not our data. The Bureau doesn't actually record lightning, it's through a third party. But we do have the data stored, and we can generate a result just to let people know that a thunderstorm or strong wind was observed, so that they're comfortable in submitting their insurance claim. That's really all it's used for. You can click on the generate PDF because a lot of the people want to have evidence. You know, the Bureau said I need evidence of a storm, sorry, the insurance company. So when you click on that, it simply just opens up the same form, but on the PDF that they can save and attach with their claim or print out or whatever. So I just find this one's useful, particularly for the older members of much confidence in navigating. One of the other things I would like to quickly show you as well, I'm just flying through some of these just because I think these are the queries we get over the phone, so it's likely that you guys would get similar queries. Very briefly, our climate change website. The data we were looking at through Climate Data Online, that is all the weather station data from all of our sites, as read, as entered. Nothing's done to it. There's no homogenization. It's just as read, and people have access to that. We also have what we call high quality data sets. Now, these data sets have been homogenized to get rid of errors and the site changes and things like that. And there's a limited sites, not as many as the main database, but this is what's used when we look at climate change science. And there's climate change website that you have access to these data sets, so your temperatures and your rainfall. You've also got further information, which links to, you know, your IPCC. So you may have heard what's happening, what's going to happen, all that sort of stuff, assessment reports, etc. All that sort of information is in our climate change section. And even just this sort of information is useful or interesting for people wanting to see how, okay, that's mean temperature in Australia. You can look at different regions. What about in New South Wales? How are we going? Similar story. Yes, but what about in winter? Okay. And there's other elements you can look at. It doesn't have everything. This one's mainly rainfall and temperature with a few other little bits and pieces as well at the bottom. Obviously rainfall is another one that's interesting for groups as well. So this is more the climate change. It's more area average data. You can't look at specific locations in the maps, but it's based on station data that's been to high quality, and that station data is all there. You can go into these in your own time and have a look at how it was created. Got expert reviews, FAQs. You've got a whole lot of information on this page. I won't talk too much about that, but it is useful to know that it's all there, because we do get, particularly those that are a little bit sceptical about climate change and how have you changed your data set and you're making it look like it's happening when it really isn't, or whatever. All those sorts of questions have been raised in our FAQ section, and we like to direct our clients there. Okay, the other page, I'm not really, again, just a very quick look at some other sections. Oh, sorry, I'm just going back to your questions, the quality control. Okay, so the quality control is a tough one for the Bureau because we are getting an enormous data into our systems every day. So as well as all this station data we've been talking about, there's a whole lot of other stuff like all satellite data, gridded data, radar, everything. And there's 2 or 3 people that are busy quality controlling. There are some automatic processes that happen, and then there are some manual processes that happen. So we have a priority on what gets quality controlled, and it's basically rainfall and temperature. They're the highest priority. Even with that, it still can take months and years. There's also priority given on sites. So those sites that are part of the high quality climate change data set, they're highest priority, and then all of our other rainfall stations and volunteer sites or new sites that have just opened, they're further down the list. And we have a massive backlog. That's unfortunate, but that's just the reality. So we always try to make sure that in the data sets that are online, people can tell if they've been quality controlled by the italic font. And once it's been quality controlled, it just goes to standard font. We also have a thing in place that if people find errors in our data set, we can speed up the response. We can send off to our team and say, look, can you look at this date? It's obviously wrong. It needs to be flagged. And they'll do it as a priority. So most of the data, recent data, is as read, and most of it's correct. However, you will get errors, spikes if it's automatic, people putting the values on the wrong day if it's manual, digital entries when people are entering forms into the database, human error. So there are sorts of errors that can get into the database, and we do try and get rid of them. It's it's always a bit tough, to be honest. I don't think we're doing the best that we could do, but it's getting better. There are more automation, and hopefully it'll get going in that direction. There was a decision not to quality control some elements, such as humidity and things like that, unless flagged. If it's flagged, we can always put in a request, but they're not done standard anymore, and that stopped many years ago. So, yeah, there's certainly some issues, but a lot of it, some quality control, some not quality control. Sorry, I'm blabbing on a bit about that. It's a whole topic in itself. Is it available to show children doing assignments? We do recommend children doing assignments use the Climate Data Online page. We think once the teacher, depending on the age obviously, but we think teachers, and we do speak to teachers, should be using this, and we don't recommend them go more detailed than what's on here. For example, our automatic weather stations reporting all the time. You guys may or may not be familiar with what's happening at the moment. The latest weather observations in the Sydney area, for example, at 10:50, so 10 minutes ago. This will update shortly to 11. So these sites are reporting all the time, and you get data every minute. So we're telling teachers, don't get students to investigate this unless you're willing to pay for it. Climate Data Services, we have a lot of data. We try and make the main parts available freely, but there's also a lot of data that's not available freely. It all can be requested, and it's cost recovery, so we charge. So this data is all available all the way down to 1 minute, back to whenever the first record took place. But if it's not on the website, it's provided at cost recovery. And when I say cost recovery, our minimum charge is $99. So you're looking at $100 to get a data set. With $100, you can get a lot of data as well, but you can also just get 1 day. We do have all this information there. There's our data services, climate data requests. So you can find information about how the charges are created as well. Okay, so I'll keep going. The last thing I just wanted to briefly show you, we did mention before about the agriculture group. So they have their own little section like we do. I'll just quickly show you what that looks like. We won't go into any of these. This is more what's happening at the moment, not past weather as such. There is a little bit of past weather, but more so what's going on now. Frost potential, they have evapotranspiration and a few other bits and pieces. In terms of past data, again, I'm back into climate data, but this is not climate data. This is part of our water. We're like all these little silos, all with our own little data sets. We are trying to improve this, And actually, as of July, we'll all be changing where we sit and what we deal with, and I think we'll be dealing with these data sets as well. Landscape water balance page. I'm not going to go into this, but just to point out that there is a lot more data. This data is a gridded data set. It's based on model data, which is this ARL model. It's probably a bit specific to our water users or our landscape people, drainage, evapotranspiration, soil moisture. If a client wants rainfall for a station or for a location where we have no rainfall stations, then this can be really handy because you can actually drill into any position by clicking on the map, and you can download the data at the bottom of the page straight into a CSV file for where I clicked on the map. That is based on a gridded data set. It's not an observation at that point. It's been like basically all the rainfall data gets sucked into an algorithm, and then it spits out a beautiful map of the rainfall. So that is available there, and you can do daily, monthly, or annual rain. Same again with each of these sort of land elements. So that's really useful as well. Historically, I think that goes back to about 2005. They do have more data, but you need to request it, and it costs money as well. So similar sort of to how we operate, limited data on the website, more data by request. So you can see that. So I did show you the Climate Data Online tool. So we've got our daily data there and our weekly data. There is extra data you can get, and I've sort of hinted at some of those data sets. So the 1 minute, your 30-minute data, high frequency. All the Bureau's weather forecasts and all the Bureau's weather warnings archived from the past. Well, not all of them actually. There is a time limit, pretty much 5 to 10 years, and its state varies. Gridded data, we've got a whole suite of grids. That's what is used to create maps and for covering each point on the Earth's surface. The weather charts, things like you see on the news of the evening, the MSLP pressure charts. You've got model data. The landscape water balance is one example of a model, but there's also the numerical weather prediction. That's sort of the forecast model data. I'm not really going to talk about any of these. Radar, satellite, there's sea level data, tide data, river height, stream flow. Fire weather data has become a big one as well, especially since this recent fire season. So you may not hear anything about those sort of indices that are particular to fire weather. But the only thing you really need to know is this big email address in the middle of the page there. So climatedata@bom.gov.au. And that's where you can put in your request. Even if you think it's somewhere and you can't find it, you can email us. If it's free, we're not going to charge you. We'll just send you the link to where it is. If it is a cost recovered service, we would reply with a quote to tell you how much it costs. So as I say, you're looking at $100 for big data sets for this sort of top section. Once you start looking at models and grids and really, really big data sets, you can be looking into the thousands. That sort of depends. And again, they're very specialised services. Probably not someone that's going to come to a library. Okay, so I think for now, that's probably about the main sort of data aspects or historical data aspects for the BOM website. So if there's any questions, happy to take them, or if there's anything covered that you want to see a bit more slowly or anything that hasn't been covered that you want to know about. Right? for the Indigenous weather section. Okay, I'm going to share it again. Now I have to we have the shortcut to the Indigenous weather section, Indigenous weather knowledge down the bottom as well. I find these shortcuts, if you're dealing with people that aren't happy clicking through a million places or they want to write down every link that they go to on the way to get there, these are really useful. There's a few good ones down there. This is our section on the Indigenous weather knowledge. We have the Bureau's the Bureau is doing a lot in this field. We have secondments where we send our staff into the communities up in the Cape York and also in the around the Darwin region, where they spend, I think it's 6 weeks in the communities, sort of learning from them and us teaching them things as well. And obviously their ideas and knowledge of the weather is different to ours. So we do try and incorporate, and we've got, if you can click on all to the, each link there talks about each of the different calendars, Indigenous calendars. And this is still work in progress as well. This is so there's reconciliation access plans, and you can look into seeing what we're doing there. But that's the easiest way to get to that one is obviously from the shortcut down in the bottom of the page there. Does that help, Richard? Is that what you're after? Yeah, as I said, we really have only touched briefly on the historical data. If we were going to talk about the Bureau as a whole, we probably need a week, and that had just been intro to each section. But this little section here does sort of give you the main groups. We also did talk about the students and teachers. There is a link there that gives a little bit of information as well, how to find data, where to find data. Oh yeah, I think that's about all I was going to cover for today. So if there's any other questions.
Hello, Ellen.
And as I said also, you're welcome to, oh sorry, I was just going to say you're welcome to email me directly as well. So the email address is louise.garbers, and I'll just put that in the chat as well, just in case there's direct contact. I just saw a comment there, the $99 for any limit. Yes, you can get up to about 100 stations, all years of record, half-hourly data, and it's still $99. There are some limits, usually a state batch limit. Do promote different users' data to public through the social media pages. We try to be honest. The real time, so the Twitters and your Facebook, most of that is what's happening now, and you'll see it if you've seen the Bureau Twitter page. It's updated regularly throughout the day, usually a few times every day. We don't get too much of a look in because that's more what's happening now that people are wanting to look at, but we do get a bit of a look in, and that's more so when the weather is fine and sunny and nothing's happening and they've got nothing to write about in terms of what's going on. And then they'll put a little mention to the climate data online, whatever, one of the other areas in the Bureau.
It certainly sounds like there'll be quite a few people going away and investigating the climate data and the pages that you've been showing us, Louise. Thank you very much for that. Any further questions or comments? Well, please join me in thanking Louise for that great session and for the amazing information that she shared with us.
Thank you very much for having me. As I say, feel free to get in contact if you're looking for anything in particular, and otherwise, enjoy the rest of your little conference.
Thank you so much, Louise.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Now, we're slightly ahead of schedule, but I'm going to view that as a positive thing. That was a fabulous session, wasn't it? We'll be back again at 1 p.m. and I'll have the Blue Jeans session open from 12:45 p.m. This afternoon, we'll be hearing from Oriana Acevedo on multilingual health information. We'll have some 5-minute talks, some small group discussions for you to discuss the sessions earlier in the day, and then there'll be a session looking at professional development resources for people to use. So I will see you online again at 1:15.